Basin Flood Control Zone District regular meeting for Wednesday, August 24th. The time is 35. Have all three supervisors here. Supervisor Sean Thorpe. Administrator Eric Martin. For those of you in the room who want to introduce yourself, there's a little button with a little man on it. If you push that, your mic will turn red, and then you can speak.
As the fund representative on the Flood Authority and the Office of Chehalis Basin.
Dylan, project manager for the Flood Control Zone District.
Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney who advises the Flood Control Zone District.
Scott, who's County Public Information Specialist.
Transfer. Department of Purpose. I'm self-employed entrepreneur. We're just landowners along the Chehalis River. We have a farm along the river. Our house is well above the floodplain, but we haven't been bothered in that respect.
And online we've got Jim Waldo, and I don't see John, but Jim is one of our consultant teams.
Good afternoon.
This is John Robinson. Good afternoon. I work with Jim Waldo, advising the district.
Good afternoon, Larry McCray. I'm the clerk of the district.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on any final action items listed on the agenda? We'll try to speak up, and also those of you using the mics, if you get real close, you'll be able to hear it better in the room and online. No one signed up for public comment. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to offer any public comment? Is there anyone online? We will move on to item number 5, approval of minutes for July 27th.
Move to approve the minutes for July 27th, 2022.
Second. Second to approve the minutes from July 27th, 2022. All in favor? Aye. Passes 3-0. Move on to item number 6, invoice approval. So it's requested that we give a little more detail on these, so I think we're going to try to combine the project update, which would be item 10 on your agenda, with the invoice approval. So we'll try to tie those together so you can kind of see how the project is progressing and how that ties in with the invoices that you're being asked to approve today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Dillon, and he'll give you kind of a briefing as we walk through the invoices there at the same time giving a project update.
So, yeah, let's kind of go down the list as we have it here. So GTH, Government Affairs. This is John Robinson, Jim Waldo's time. And so we're kind of our senior kind of advisors that just have a lot of experience with the NEPA process, a lot of experience with according to tribal government agencies. So, yeah, just their experience has been extremely helpful on this whole process. So they're involved with our meetings when we explore ecology. They kind of their time is wrapped in there, just kind of their attending those meetings and kind of provide their guidance on the project. GTH, we also have Bill Lynn. So he is just a real expert in state law. So anytime we have a question with SEPA, as it refers back to state law and actual WAC kind of guidance, investigate that for us.
Attorney, they actually counsel for the district, especially with regards to endangered.
The Lewis County Administration, that's for Eric and Claire's time, and then HDR Engineering is on here twice. They're the lead environmental and engineering group on the project. So when we're designing fish passage, or right now we're looking at geotechnical investigations, we're actually out in the field today collecting some more geotechnical data at the site, looking at superficial features and rock outcroppings. And then they're out there doing a site investigation. They're going to look at locations for future boring. So that's kind of what they're working on right now. They're also looking at the open channel fish passage. And so the draft EIS, one of the impacts that we have to fish is during our construction phase. Currently, we have trap and transport, and so we're looking at having an open channel during construction, so that the fish can swim freely up and downstream while we do construction. So those are the two things that we're looking at right now. It's just that kind of the geotechnical aspects of the structure, and then the fish passage during construction. They also have their environmental group. They were the lead authors on the mitigation, vegetation management plan. So we got some questions on the vegetation management plan that have more detail, and there's that right now. And we also have the next one, management. So we actually have Mary management with us today. She's the lead author of the mitigation plan. So the draft EIS identifies impacts, and we have to, as a district, mitigate those impacts where we can avoid and minimize. So first we avoid and minimize that. We've gone through that step for a lot of our impacts, and now we're at the kind of mitigation. And that's on that plan today, give you all an update. Well, a briefing on that plan. So currently they're adding some more detail to the mitigation plan. So right now the mitigation plan kind of looks, they did a desktop study and they looked at locations where mitigation can be done. And so mitigation is, adding cold pockets of water, creating pools, adding woody debris to the banks. In a channel like this, in its natural state, it would be chock full of wood, but just kind of the history of the channel, the splash dam, logging that's kind of happened within the basin, has kind of carved out the channel and washed out all that wood, and so wanted to mitigate back into the channel, which creates, again, shade, pockets of cold water for the fish to find refuge in. So they looked at kind of from a desktop level and a modeling level where kind of sediment degrades and degrades and where habitat, looking at the higher banks, kind of where you can have riparian habitat to provide shade to the water. And so at that level, they've identified some really areas where there could be mitigation. And now they're taking it to the next step and actually doing more. They've identified these areas, now they want to go on site, look at them, and see kind of what they're seeing from the desktop level is actually they're kind of on the ground. And so in that effort, I am helping Mary Lou and her team reach out to landowners, and then her team's going out and collecting site data at these locations. On here. And that's to, again, add more detail investigation.
On the client submit, how many people are working on this project? Do you Mary Louise seems dead.
Sorry, 8 is the Busquets.
Okay.
I can count them up and see if it's more like 10, but.
And typically on, the reason why I want to ask this question is just because we have $500,000 for the supply and with HDR, with what they're doing. And just, I think it's important to me as well, it's important to what we're getting on the back end. So I'm really excited to be able to see this today, to go through this. And then as far as the HDR engineering, that's not just one person, that's a team of people that are working on this.
Yeah, absolutely a team. Yeah, they have, nobody's on full-time, right? These are consultants, they have other projects they're working on. But we have, obviously, a project manager, they have their kind of lead on the fish passage, Matt Prosiv. They have several geotechs, 2 on the field today, obviously collecting data. But yeah, this is a team of consultants. They all have their own specialties. This project is, when you have a project of this scope and scale and size, you need experts in habitat restoration, you need dam safety engineers, geotechs, structural engineers, and so yeah, HDR they're one of the larger firms in the nation, and probably the world, and so they kind of have a lot of the stuff. Instead of having several different firms kind of doing each of these tasks, they have their firm that they branch out and have some expertise. They got each one of them is going to have.
What's important to understand, I think, is that, since the draft EIS came out, there were lots and lots of comments from the public, from agencies, from different folks, and there was a lot of potential, at least in a draft, impacts that were identified. And so since that time, a huge amount of our effort has been to address those impacts. So if they say, it's going to have a significant impact on fish or on water temperature or water quality of some kind, most of our time has been spent to try to understand that better, define it better, and then where needed, avoid that impact altogether, which is the first choice, minimize it if we can, and then as a third choice, we mitigate for it. So that means, you offset it in some way. So if there's an impact, you can't avoid it, so you go do something somewhere else or even on-site to make it better for that impact. So that's a huge part of what both Kleinschmidt and HDR have been doing, and it really has come to a head now, especially since, as we talked about at our last meeting, we've got a couple of new alignments that we're looking at for a variety of reasons we talked about last time. So that's a whole other piece of work, which is pretty involved. And the good news is we did receive quite a bit of additional funding to do that work. So that's a good thing, but it is a heavy lift. So yeah, I can understand why you ask those questions, and I think you're right to ask them. And anything else we can do to provide you with information about those, or if there's specific questions you're getting from the public, we want to answer those, and we want to be transparent. So keep asking, and we'll try to keep giving you good information. How much coordination goes all these different work on GTH or climate change?
Yeah, we have a check-in meeting once a week, Monday. That's a lot of our coordination, and then a big part of my job is coordinating the groups at those meetings, so making sure that the PM and HDR can understand on and kind of how those
Absolutely. Out of order. Every week on my calendar, at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, I have HDR calls. I usually don't go to the 1 o'clock, participate in the 1 o'clock call because it's very technical with all kinds of different stuff. And then the 2 o'clock call is a little more high-level strategic, what's step, sometimes involving OCD issues. But Jerry Otto, who's the lead for HDR on this whole I have felt like in the last, especially big, bulky, uncoordinated bunch of people, or have been very coordinated, because none of their comment on money, I mean, public officials, you're all right, absolutely, you should be finding out what this is. Put it in the context that all of this is part of the $70 million that came through the legislature, signed by the governor, went to the OCB board. We then went through, half goes for fish, half goes for flood, and there are these local projects and so on and so forth, and how much comes to the flood zone district. And all of this money is out of that was decided about a year ago with, and of course, at that point, the flood zone district gives general categories, like give a government budget, this sort of down to this level of specific contracts and dollar amounts, and obviously that's what that is.
I would also say that if you wanted to take a little bit deeper dive into this project, we can think about that and start to find places to invite one of you to certain meetings. You can come, you can listen to the real technical part, or you can listen to the more strategic part, but if you're interested in doing that, absolutely, you're welcome to come to some of our meetings and listen in and ask questions, and we're more than happy to get you guys plugged into those opportunities. So I think those are the big ones, which I'm sure that was probably a main part of your concern. Maybe when we get to Mary Louise, she'll talk a little, also just touch quickly on the hyperetic exchange project and where that's at and the work that's being done on that, because that's also her project. But did you have any questions on any of the other smaller inputs?
The last one was the reimbursement for stamps.
That's all Lara. I don't know what she's doing with that. I would watch her closely though.
Maybe you could expound upon the difference between client charges. I know one of them says the mitigation plan, and the other one is for.
Yeah, so I think we have them broken up into engineering services and then environmental services. And so one group is strictly their engineering side, so they're doing geotechnical, dam safety, the fish passage structure, but it's very, it's kind of engineering related. The other side is environmental.
He was asking about clinchment.
Oh, climate. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you talked about. So there are two different pots of money, which is important. Let's start with that. First, it's important to know that our participation in the strategy is all about the project, which is the water retention project. The second piece on the second page there, with the Kleinschmidt, and Mary Louise can talk in more detail about it if she wants, is OCB has originally split up, the fish money and the flood money. Well, now they have a middle piece, which is maybe it's good for fish, maybe it's good for flood, maybe it's good for both. The hyperetic exchange project fits in that middle section, and that's why it's separated out with a separate grant number and a separate contract with Kleinschmidt. So that's why the separate thing that they're working on for us. It may at some point become mitigation for the project, but right now it's kind of a pilot project, so it's in that middle bucket for OCB's money that they're granting us. For this project, hyperetic exchange. Mary Louise can expound on that for days if you want her to. I want to see what it says today.
Try to spell it.
Any other questions on the inputs? Okay, thanks. Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the inputs as presented.
Moved and seconded to the invoices as presented for a grand total of $400,267. All in favor? Aye. Aye. 3-0. We'll move on to item number 7. Resolution number 20-002.
Want me to speak to it first, or do you want to move it first?
I'll get this one.
Approve resolution number 22-002. notice of hearing of the 2022 budget amendment.
Second, to approve resolution.
For the record, Eric Martin, Administrator for the District, Resolution 22-002 is a notice of hearing to amend the 22 budget for the Chehalis River Basin Flood Control Zone District. The hearing will take place on Wednesday, September 28th, on or after 2:30 p.m. The notice will be published in the Chronicle on September 15th and September 22nd of 2022, and in the East County Journal on September 21st of 2022. The notice will reflect an increase in expenditure of $2,891,601 and an increase in revenue of the same for the Chehalis Basin work unless otherwise amended. Questions?
Moved and seconded to approve resolution -002. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. Presentation on mitigation plan.
I want to make a comment first. I will not be here on the 20th of September. I had a trip scheduled.
Is that a proxy vote? No, sorry.
I'll be able to talk to you. I'll be on a boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean somewhere.
All right, so Mary Louise Keith is here with us today. We're really excited. She came up from Oregon, right? Oh, Rushbury, sorry. Still in Washington. But she's been doing a fantastic job on this project for probably, close to a year now you've been working with us. Really happy to have her. This was a presentation that she gave mostly in part to the Office of the Chehalis Basin earlier this month. And it was really impactful, and so we wanted to bring this to you as well as the citizens here who might be wanting to hear this presentation. So I'm excited to turn it over to Mary Louise soon.
First, I'm going to introduce her.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's right. I apologize, Jay. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to put it for the landowners and for the supervisors, put some context on what you're about to see. Following up on Matt talked about the EIS coming out. So the state EIS, which came out a year and a half ago, had no response from the flood zone district about how we'll minimize the impact of this facility. So basically, it was agency people saying, what's the worst, what are, within maybe some reasons, what are the worst impacts we could conceive building this proposed flood retention facility up above PL? And the answer was a couple of thousand pages by the time you had addendums and so on. The answer was a lot. And so here you are, flood zone district. Here's what we think are the worst case scenario. And you're not going to build it if all these remain in place. And so the flood zone district, as the applicant, has to now come forward to say, well, here's what we would do to reduce, avoid, minimize any of these impacts. So that's what all this work is in response to the state and federal agencies. Their concerns with environmental impacts from this facility. Okay. So they're doing what they're required to do in this process. And I'm sorry it's expensive. And I'm especially sorry it's so time sensitive. It would take a week, not a year. But it is what it is because it's so big and so important. And if Laura, you could put that slide up that I think. This is just a reminder of.
This is the only thing I received.
Oh.
Did you send me something?
I see the wrong thing. Okay. Sorry. What we had, if you remember, just a few months ago, when we had a big storm, and we had almost a catastrophic flood, but not quite. The Whatcom River was the same height that it was in '96. Cowlitz River was the same height, same flow it was in '96. But the main stem of the Chehalis, instead of being 45,000 cubic feet per second, was more like 33,000 cubic feet per second. And it was that difference between a big flood, and a few people got hit, and a catastrophic flood, like we had in '96, like we had in '07. What's the difference? The difference is the main stem of the Chehalis, and that flood that we just had mimicked
exactly what would have happened in '96 had this facility been there, holding 65,000 acre feet. That's why we're here, is because of the tremendous potential for protecting families and communities, not just in Lewis County, but actually a foot more or more of the peak at Montesano, all the way down to 6 inches in the flood, all the way down to Cosmopolis. So we're only flood piece that needs to happen, but it is a very major one. So that's why that's what this flood zone district is focused on. Dr. Keith now responding to what are the specific habitat changes, damages that could occur if you just built this thing and then you didn't to address the concern. That's what this presentation is, and that's where it fits within this process, and that's why landowners will be contacted by the flood zone district to see if they might even consider participating if in exchange they got particularly right on the river, get a considerable, very major reduction in their. But just wanted to put that on the table. I want to say one more thing. This is an enormous step forward in this process. Those 7 floods, when people start talking about this water retention facility, there's always been fish versus flood, right? Well, I care more about fish. I care more about flood. Solve my problem. And there's been this fighting and tension between, well, do you care more about the fish or do you care more about the people who get flooded? And it's put in such a way that it's like we have to pick, right? You have to pick one of them. What this presentation offers is that's not the choice anymore. And the best science is going to say, if you do all these things, mitigate the fish impact in the upper Chehalis Basin, then that's a false choice. Then the choice is, do you want to protect people and do it in a way that we can mitigate them? That's a whole different, what everybody in this room, where they come down on the I care more about the fish or I care more about the flood side, everybody kind of has their own different weight to those two. But as you know, there are a lot of people who care about one, a lot of people care about the other. And the only way this project happens is if it isn't a hit on the fisheries, and if there's hundreds of miles of habitat work done through the OCB to grow the potential for habitat across the basin, and community families get flood protection. But just give it to you that what Dr. Keith's about to present, that's where it fits in the process, and that it's an enormous step forward in this whole effort.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I jump into this mitigation plan, I'd like to talk about our team. And so, I'm going to start with myself. I hail from New England, where I did my academic training, and I moved for a job to the Pacific Northwest, east side of the Cascades. Worked with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for about 7.5 years, doing research on salmon ecology and behavior. 7.5 years in, my family moved west again, this time over the Cascades, and at that time I became a consulting fish scientist. I've been working in the environmental consulting arena for 23 years. I've worked on hundreds of projects over that time, and virtually every single one of them has involved the assessment of fish use of habitat and potential impacts and minimizing impacts for that habitat. Let's see. Currently, I'm working with the district to lead up the mitigation program for the flood retention facility. I'm also working as an expert on the Klamath River dam removal, where I serve as the ecologist overseeing for the FERC, which is Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I oversee the work that's being done by consultants down there in the dam removal and making sure that it's appropriate and cost effective. I work
Removal for who, for what?
Klamath River, those 4 dams that are being removed, hydropower dams that are being removed on the Klamath River. For the Klamath River removal,
The Snake River.
correct, yes. Klamath River is south in Oregon. I also am working with the Swinomish tribe, advising on study plans and reports associated with, the Seattle City Lights, relicensing of the Skagit project. And I'm on several teams working for the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Indian Affairs on water rights adjudications in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, and serve as the expert for the Klamath Lake adjudication. And then the last 2 projects I wanted to mention are our Fisheries study program, looking at baseline impact of fish habitat from 2 hydropower projects up in Alaska. That's me in a nutshell, and fortunately, I have some other people on my team that are also very experienced, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes to point them out. Mr. Shane Cherry is our wetlands mitigation expert. Shane is quite experienced in riverine processes as a geomorphologist, and he is experienced in permitting and wetland permitting and mitigation in the state of Washington. Dr. Paul Reed is our lead engineer design person for the mitigation project, the different actions we will talk about later. Paul has over 34 years of experience with river restoration in the Pacific Northwest. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Washington, and he teaches an undergraduate course in that office. And then we have a NEPA expert, Betsy McGregor, who is kind of unique on our team because she brings the balance of wildlife science and fisheries science together. She also brings the perspective of doing ESA and NEPA kind of work from the agency side as well as from the consulting side. And then behind these 4 folks, I have, I think probably more like 8 others that support them and help us with different tasks. So there are actually 2 different plans that were developed for mitigation. One we're calling the Flood Retention Expandable Facility Stream and Terrestrial Mitigation Plan. Huge mouthful, but that's the title that was requested that we use. The other is the Stream Mitigation, Wetlands Mitigation Plan. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Wetland Mitigation Plan today. Wetlands are very highly regulated. The state and federal agencies tell you exactly how much you have to account for what's lost. What is the ratio? It's all defined. It's just math. So I'll just touch on that briefly in the end. But for the flood retention mitigation, the stream mitigation plan, it's a little bit different. It's not as highly regulated. And as Jay mentioned, we're responding to the impact, and we were guided to respond to the impact in the DEIS. We have to make sure our mitigation addresses all of those impacts, even if those impacts might be outdated now because we've done some avoidance measures, such as developing vegetative management plans. So there's 6 categories of mitigation that we developed and are reported on in this plan. I'm going to talk to you about 5 of them today. The 6th one, the Water Quality Management Plan, is simply a plan to go out and monitor water quality, make sure we're in compliance. I'm not going to talk about that at all. It wouldn't be very much fun. So when I hit each of these categories, I'm going to focus on 3 things. I'm going to focus on the impact in the DEIS and what the proposed mitigation is to remove that impact. I'm going to talk a little bit about the existing conditions in the river as well, because it's not like you can damage a mile of stream and enhance a mile of stream. You actually have to take that mile of stream and make it better than it was before you did your action. So that is called ecological lift. In the mitigation plan, we have to demonstrate that everything that the district will do will improve the habitat in the river beyond what it is today for the FRE. So, the first of these 6 categories is aquatic habitat access. And this is simply removal of barriers, culverts that don't work anymore, fishways that don't work anymore. Impact in the DIS specifically addressed by this category is the degradation and loss of function of the river underneath the FRE facility footprint. So that includes the temporary pool. And they have calculated that as 17 miles of stream channel. Our proposal is to open up 17 times 2.5 for 42.5 stream miles.
That because it's both sides of the river.
Sorry?
Do you come up with that because it's both sides of the river?
You have to mitigate with a ratio. And we've been advised by the state representatives that mitigation has to be greater than 2, that ratio. We can do it for starters. So on this graph, I'm going to get up. On this slide, and hopefully everybody can still hear me. And I just want to orient you all to this image because you're going to see it. All right, so I want to orient you to this graph. You're going to see it in a number of slides. This is what we're calling the mitigation area. We've broken the upper basin up into sub-basins. This is where the yellow scar where the proposed FRE facility is. So A is largely forested, urban property. Our mitigation goes from the top of Route A all the way down to the confluence just above the confluence. And you can see by looking at that image that there are a lot of dots. As a matter of fact, there are 216 fish barriers that have been identified in the priority database of the state of Washington, that's the WBFW database, that we could open up in an area that would give us 375 additional miles of habitat for salmon and steelhead to use. So we feel like there's a lot of options out there for opening up habitat. Ecological lift that you get when you open up the barrier is obviously more habitat. But we want to go a little bit beyond that, and we want to select regions that also will support cooled water, because water temperature is limiting in this river system right now today. We have crews out there taking temperatures this summer, and I was out there last summer myself, and 25 degrees C is an average temperature that we're seeing in the Mesa. It's too hot for salmon. More than that, we really want to have spring salmon spawning here. So we open up habitats that can bring more cool water in, the fish can go up into those habitats and use those cool tributaries. That gives us ecological lift. We're also going to be able to co-locate this action, this habitat action, with some of the other things that we're going to propose to do that I'll talk about in a little bit. This is an example of a culvert that Kleinschmidt has done recently in the state of Washington. On the left, you see a clearly not functioning culvert with a stream that has too much water in it that's a barrier to fish. And on the right, you see a much more appropriately sized culvert that has a different gradient that will allow the fish to swim up into that stream. This is an example of the kind of work we're looking at, or actions we're looking at for barrier removal. Next category is one that we're calling aquatic habitat restoration. And Matt talked a little bit about this earlier. The impacts that habitat restoration help us address are that impact underneath the temporary pool, that 17 miles. It also helps us address water temperature impacts. the impact that you see up here doesn't include the avoidance measure associated with the vegetative management plan. So we're going again from the worst case scenario downstream of the facility. And with the vegetative management plan, we'll knock that temperature effect down a little bit, but we'll still have about 1.2 degrees of impact that we have to address. We'll be addressing changes to the riverbed itself, from sediment transport and wood debris not being able to move when the facility's in operation. And then the kinds of effects that those things have on fish habitat, and lastly, groundwater.
So when we're talking about adding vegetation to, how do you mitigate for the change over time, because it cuts out different vegetation? How are you going to mitigate for it not just washing out the vegetation?
But it's a perfect question. If you give me 1 minute, I just want to get off this slide, and that is that in 2020, Kleinschmidt and others did a report for the district that identified from desktop analysis several hundred different actions. We took those actions and we applied hydrologic and geomorphic analysis to those. One of those analyses was patterns of channel migration over time in the river. So we looked at what they had identified as a specific location for a habitat enhancement, and if it was in the area where there was active channel migration, that was a no, that's not going to work in this. So we went from hundreds, I think we looked at over 250 different actions to 56 that once you apply more analysis to them are, I call them our analytically or geomorphically vetted. And then we've been going out in the summer to those we can get access to, engaging landowners and going to those we can collect more information about those. Again, another level of analysis to make sure that this will work for a long time at this spot in this river.
Not continual.
Correct. Yes. So here's a map that shows you where those 56, I think, actions actually would be. Quite a few of them upstream above the temporary pool, but then a number of them also dotted throughout the main channel down to the Nuwaka. The goal of these actions is to increase complexity of the habitat so that it's better for the aquatic organisms. Put structures in the stream, wood structures and gravel structures that will divert flow in different directions and engage a small channel that has only a little bit of flow in it. Sometimes we can make that a little bit more flow, increasing the amount of habitat. We can put structures in the stream that collect gravel behind it and become spawning habitats for the salmon. We can put structures in the stream that get scoured out underneath and create a pool, a deeper pool, which in this river will provide a thermal refuge for fishes in the warm summer months. So all of these things have been looked at from a remote perspective and are being pursued further.
What's an example of off-channel mitigation? What do we do off-channel?
Off-channel mitigation, I'm going to pick this one off the top of my head. We have a crew out in the field on a property today, and they're looking at an old oxbow. The oxbow contains water still, but the water is not connected to the so they're going out, they're measuring the temperature of that water. It's cold water especially. We want to see if we can reconnect that to the river. And the other thing the reason you want to connect this off-channel habitat is because just like humans, when floods happen, organisms have negative effects. They get pushed out of the habitat where they are. If you engage the floodplain, you dissipate that flow, those organisms have a place to go to get out of the flood safely. And then they can stay in that reach of the river and not all get washed out. So the list, this is just a simple depiction for you of how we're going to get one of the ways we're going to get an ecological lift, and that is the images on the right show the Chehalis River in its current state. Very straight, one channel. There's not a lot of complexity to it. The habitat is very uniform. Actions we put into place are intended to make this river move towards that natural system on the right with graded channels, forested islands, alcove habitat, and trees, tall trees along the banks. We also can get ecological lift by co-locating our enhancement actions, right? So we take these, I don't know if you can see them at the beginning and the end of the reef, there are some red dots. Those are rocks. And those rocks have different functions. Rocks that at the top are used to divert the flow into that side channel that I was talking to you about, to keep more flow going there. And the rocks at the bottom will rough that into channel up so that gravel, spawning gravel, gets deposited behind it. The big orange bars are large wood pieces that will help divert the flow and encourage habitat structure for the fish. So by clumping, Cowlitz locating a number of different actions within a reef can improve the overall quality of that reef, not just one little site we're working on. It's a bigger picture. Another category of mitigation is riparian or stream buffer expansion. And this is a fancy word for replanting native trees along the stream channel. This addresses impacts the 17 miles again, the temperature again through shading, a loss of 33 acres of buffer underneath the temporary reservoir, change, and the woody issue the wood material transport comes up a lot in almost all of these, and fish habitat obviously comes up a lot. Our proposed mitigation is to revegetate degraded habitat downstream of the FRE, covering an area of 25.5 miles. Seems like a lot, but you go to the next slide, we'll see our map again. And we were able to get access to a National Marine Fisheries Service database where they went in and they did an analysis of the entire Chehalis Basin and what the riparian habitat looks like. And they showed that it was where it was degraded and where it was good. And this image here with the orange and the red, the light orange, the dark orange, the light green, and the dark green, shows all of the stream segments with degraded riparian habitat. So all of those stream segments could benefit from planting native trees, native shrubs and trees. Over 147 miles of habitat that are on our list. Source through. And had crews in the field just last week, week before I guess, looking at riparian vegetation and documenting the conditions, so they were verifying this analysis that the federal government did. What's the ecological list? Well, I mentioned the EFP here because, as Jay said, we didn't get credit for that avoidance in the DEIS, but it's there now. So originally they were going to clear cut all of the trees underneath the temporary pool, but now the vegetative management says no, we don't have to do that. We can selectively remove ones that are going to risk projects or personal safety, and we will replant ones that die with flood tolerant trees. So there's less of an impact there on the buffer than was originally in the EIS. We also, as I talked about, are proposing more of a buffer downstream. Those two things together will increase the amount of shade on the river. and help keep the river cool, as opposed to warming up as it comes out of, the temporary pool and moves downstream. You can also get ecological lift with riparian plantings, because those of you who have ever walked or floated down the river know there's Himalayan blackberries, reed canary grass. These things don't do much for shade. They're short. By revegetating with native shrubs and trees, we can increase the shade, we can provide better habitat for wildlife species that like native plants as opposed to reed canary grass, and we can increase the bank stability. So that's our ecological lift there.
Question about that ecological lift. Spending a few decades on the river, we have a lot of areas that would look like perhaps they are degraded, but the issue is that it's too wet for trees to grow there. It's too wet for even brush to grow there. The area, but not really producing shade. And then we'll also get plenty of logs that come down and they end up in your field during floods, but they're constantly moving through. Cover and also log structures, things like that. Additionally, we've had a lot more beaver coming on through the decades. That is damage to the trees. So start backwards. There's what you can do about beaver is plant more trees. They have a role. They have a valuable role in rivers in the Pacific Northwest. Beaver dams are great habitats for coho salmon to grow in. So you can't move them. All you can do is make sure you keep planting trees for the beavers to coexist with mitigation actions. The movement of the trees and the marshy areas, again, we've done this assessment of where we could physically locate trees based on hydrology, based on floodplain engagement, and migration characteristics of the river. That's all been through modeling on the computer. Now we have to go out in the field and verify those. So we wouldn't attempt to turn a marsh into a forest. We may try to turn it into a native wetland, but we wouldn't make that change and that adjustment. And we would be placing wood structures in places where the river is stable and is likely to be stable based on the history of the river for the next 10 years or more. All right, talked a lot about fish and aquatic habitat. Well, there's also a bunch of wildlife impacts that are raised in the DEIS. And I'm not going to read through all of these, so you don't have to worry about that. But I do want you to understand that this impact for wildlife species is largely associated with construction of the facility, and again, that temporary pool and the loss of forest habitat associated with that temporary pool. So our mitigation proposal is to conserve a block of forest upstream of the FRE. And the number we have proposed is 500 acres, and that could be a contiguous block, or it could be a couple of different blocks, or it could be a stretch. But whatever it is, it's the equivalent of 20.6 miles of a buffer on two sides of a stream that never, ever is touched again.
On the buffer situation, I owned a property down in Pacific County, and that 200 wide foot buffer is a pretty healthy piece. I'm not giving ground away. I sold ground to the state for a 50-year contract. I'm spending a ton of money on this proposal you're coming up with already. And if I'm going to give land away at $200 an acre, you're buying the ground, the trees, and everything. And that $50 million budget you got is going to go away in a hurry if you're looking at that kind of acreage. And that's not going to make the fish run up the stream any better. Question on this canary grass deal. I don't know if you were involved in the China situation over there, but they squandered several $1 million in that piece of work before they developed the second phase. Well, there's about 8-foot canary grass growing over there right now, and all the woody material that was buried out there in that swamp, it's gone. I don't see a real benefit to that one.
I think that
It's just my humble analogy. And one thing I would like to see, I haven't seen a number yet, and I've asked several people. I want to know what fish count is prior to this project taking effect, and I want to know what fish count is when you get done. I have never had anybody tell me that, and I asked the county engineer that. We have a crane business, we set one of these fish-friendly cement bridges, and he referred me, maybe I need to talk to the ecology department. Needless to say, he didn't have a freaking clue. And the thing is, you've talked about all these little spots up here that are red and blue and whatever they are. Those are just little spotted areas. You're not doing the whole stream. Down here at this project, the Windlock, they cleared out this chunk of where the bridge was built. The county put the bridge in, but you go down the stream 150 feet and you're back in this 8-foot canary grass. And you got quite a ways to go to get to the running water. But anyway, I see you have a passion for it, but I don't know if the practicability is going to be workable.
Albert, one of the things, Dr. Keith, you can interrupt me, you can tell me if I'm wrong. The presentation we saw where you were talking about the 500 acres and the buffer, I thought that was primarily in forest land, upper stream, County warehouser. In other words, it isn't all the way down the Chehalis River, 200-foot buffer.
You're still going to have to apply.
Yes, except yes. The reason it won't be maybe quite as expensive is that whereas there can't cut to the stream now.
Well, that's
Private forest land can't go all the way down.
You're right, the large companies don't get compensated like small property owners like me.
But your basic, here's the basic point. There's nothing, not only with mitigating for the potential dams, but also more broadly for the shale spaces, the other habitats working. No one is talking about going to condemn your property. Here, thank you for donating your property for habitat. This is only done willing buyer, willing seller. And will it be expensive? Some of it absolutely will be expensive. No question about that.
you said a mouthful. Gave me a mouthful of things to talk about, but.
He often does.
But that's okay. I'm hoping that by the time I get to the end of this presentation, I've addressed some of the things that you raised and how we would approach them. But one of the things I would say is the way that we do restoration is we work with the river system that we're working. My company, understands riverine processing, site restoration projects, so that those actions work with what's happening in this river at this time. And so we increase our chances of success by using that.
So just real quick, when he brought up the point about the fish, about increasing the population of the fish, you mentioned earlier that 25 degrees is what the current temperature is right now. That's not suitable for fish. And from all the evidence and things that I've read so far to date shows that the continual decline in fish habitat along the Chehalis River because of climate change and the temperature. And so if we do nothing, potentially there's a species of salmon that's close to an endangered species list, if I'm not correct. And so we're heading towards an extinction already if we do nothing to help preserve the fish. Is that correct?
That's what the climate model suggests, is that spring Chinook salmon won't remain in the main stem of the Chehalis. They'll be isolated to select tributaries in a place I would call the middle.
The process here of the vegetation is to cool the temperatures to habitation to continue to grow.
To give the fish refuge when they're coming up in the main stem to 25 degrees, you have a deep pool that's 19, they can go in and they can hang out there. And the temperature in the river will swing day to night, and it will cool down at night. So the fish, the adult salmon, can hide in the pool and wait till the night and move up to the next thermal refuge. It gets to those spawning grounds in a area where the river is cool enough for them to spawn.
I've read the data right in the sense of the decline in the fish population because of the temperature.
Yes.
And so if we do nothing, that decline continues to fall off, right?
Okay, we're going to go on. Last one is largely material. I talked about it, and so I won't spend a lot of time except to say that it is a specific impact, and we are required to have a mitigation category to address it. The ways we're addressing it are through riparian planting and forest conservation, so that trees can mature, die naturally, fall and be recruited into the river or wood. But it's also in creating wood structures now that will capture some of those trees that are coming down the river in a good spot, and pile those up and get some sedimentation that will help build an island and get some natural reforestation on that island. Think, actions like that. We propose to do this throughout the entire mitigation area in different spots along the way. And just some of the goals of large wood. You can see pretty well from this one that where Robert is standing is pretty shallow, but the river comes and it has scoured out a pool underneath the other part of that log, and that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see gravel deposits in the area along the edge, and we want to see a deeper hole, because if salmon spawn in those gravel deposits, guess what? That pool becomes a rearing habitat for those juveniles when they come out of that rat. So it's a great picture of what we're trying to accomplish with wood in the system. Here's how we get ecological lift. You get immediate lift if there's no wood and you put wood in, because it immediately creates a different habitat. It provides cover for fish. It provides a substrate for macroinvertebrates, which are eaten by the fish and other organisms in the river. But we also can get more lift by, again, co-locating our wood projects in places that maybe, this is an example here where we do riparian planting along this tributary, so that is producing or retains cool water coming in. We would do some flood fencing to encourage flood to move through these channels in this forest and hook up with that cool water tributary. Now we've got more habitat, cool water habitat available for fish to utilize in this. Really close to the end. Wetlands mitigation, as I said, highly regulated. There's specific categories of the type of wetland that you're dealing with, whether it's a buffer or what kind of wetland. There's like 6 different categories, and for every category, the regulators have a defined mitigation ratio. Ultimately, in the end, what it all means is that there will be more acres of wetland along the Chehalis River if the project is built than there are today. More than 2 times as many. Last thing I'm going to mention is part of the mitigation plan, and a really important part, is in the last chapter. And it's not fully fleshed out yet. It's a framework for a monitoring and adaptive management plan. We need monitoring because as reminded us, things don't always work out the way you want them to. So we need to monitor our mitigation actions and make sure that our goals and objectives are being met, that we are creating pool habitat with that wood structure, that the wood structure is staying in place where we want it to be, that the gravel is building up behind it. Those are all monitoring activities that will take place. And then we have the whole concept of uncertainty. uncertainty in the way the river's gonna behave, uncertainty in precipitation and climate conditions and temperatures in the river system. And so we have to have an adaptive management plan because this mitigation program has to live for the life of the project, which is estimated to be 50 years anyway. So we have to show that our mitigation will last, and if it doesn't, we have to have triggers and adjustments that allow us to adaptively manage and make sure that that mitigation goal is met over the course of the project. Happy to take any questions.
I have a really, really stupid question. What happened to all the way free? What, I mean, over the last 50 years, and the floods and things we've had all kinds of debris that was in that river. Where is it today?
I'm guessing, and Matt may know more, if Shane were here, he would know more for sure. I'm guessing that a lot of it was blown out in that really big, huge flood, that was, those sediments, yeah. Because I know that's what happens to a lot of the sediment, a lot of the bed scour that's out there. And I floated the river from upstream of Chehalis to, the South Fork. And there isn't hardly any wood down in the channel, but I did see wood up on the top of these banks that were maybe 20 feet tall. And I was like, holy cow, that was a lot of powerful water to dump. And they're not just pieces, they're stacks of wood.
That's a lot of that was falling debris, if I remember correctly. That's my thing, is that with all these man-made structures in the stream, I don't know how much force we're guarding against that's preventing that from washing out again. And it's the natural process to let the arguably debris where it needs to. But I understand the reason for the program, I understand the reason for what we're doing. It kind of drives me crazy when we try to artificial thing happen.
Yeah. Natural processes are much better to work with.
All four large basin reefs, when I was a fisherman years ago, I loved those little pools underneath the ball. Artificially created that.
I think one thing that's important to keep in mind with these systems. Yeah, but I think you raised a really good question. I think one thing that's important to keep in mind with these systems is that they're not natural right now. There's been a lot of human impact over the years, and so it's not a natural state as it is currently. And that's why there is kind of the, as much kind of vertical eroded banks and things that are in the channel now, and why that there is a, if we were working in an extremely pristine natural habitat, we wouldn't be able to claim, hey, we're going to have an ecological lift by doing these projects. And why we have the opportunity to create this ecological lift is that the habitat's so degraded, the natural channel is degraded. And that just happened over a long period of time. A lot of it due to, old logging practices, things like that. And so we've inherited that, and this is kind of the stage we're at. That's why these types of projects, they are artificial, but they're also, we're putting into a channel that's already been impacted, and it needs that. It could work itself out for hundreds of years. The channel reform, reshape itself, and move, and we create a floodplain at a lower elevation. But we could also do something today to create that ecological lift, and create habitat that's been degraded.
Do you have any provide the supervisors maybe some that you've gotten so far? If you've had conversations with the agencies, I know you gave this presentation earlier this month, and the work is not that far from but have you gotten any feedback from agencies or staff people or others about the work that we're doing? And
The only feedback that we've received is informal feedback after the presentation, the OCD, and that was good feedback from ecology, and WDFW, and that we were thinking about the processes and the system as a whole, and addressing, ecological aspects of improving the habitat. They were excited to see our thoughts and how those things came together. That's pretty limited. Want me to take a couple minutes and talk about the Hyper-Reef project and how that's different from the mitigation plan?
You guys want to hear more about Hyper Exchange today?
No.
You're good. My mind's already
So I do think it's interesting, though, that the plan is not just to create a canopy, but also to have it wash out in some spaces to produce that wooded debris that provides that natural habitat. So very, very interesting. Have you done much research on the shaded areas? I'm sure you have, the shaded areas in the Chehalis River compared to unshaded areas to see what the variance in temperature is?
The model that NOAA, National Fisheries Service, put together suggests it's a model based on historic conditions. They looked at the historic riparian, and they look at the current riparian. And the model suggests that when you lose canopy cover and you get to the point where your canopy is, your angle of opening 30 degrees or greater, then you're already up a degree water temperature. You're letting too much sunlight in, so that water temperature is going to warm 1 degree in that reach. Now, that's a simplified model, right, because it depends on how deep the water is and how fast it's moving. But it shows you that there's a direct relationship, especially in our very sunny, dry summers, between solar radiation. And that shading of the stream is important. Hard, you're not going to get a big bite out of the Chehalis to put tons of shading on the main stem. Wide river at this point. It's only going to help on the edges. That's why we would want to do pockets of temperature refugia in addition to areas where we can affect shade in maybe tributary confluences, where there are side channels or natural islands.
Comment. I want to go back to the word cost, and Albert made the comment that it's going to be very costly, and the answer is that's correct. Cost everywhere you look. There's cost in not responding, not building this thing, and in 2007, the analysis, the economic analysis that followed that flood was $932 million lost from 500 million plus from people in the county, starting with people like Pete and Herd, but people in their homes, property damage, business, 22 businesses lost, I-5 covering all that. So don't do anything, it's very costly. EDC, 2 years ago, when Matt Mediation was there, did a study based upon the state programmatic EIS, said no action means $3.5 billion. That's a guess, but that's the best guess. $3.5 billion lost Chehalis Basin from flood damage if you don't build this thing. And you still have flood damage even if you do build it, but that much more if you don't. So there's cost to not acting, and there's cost to acting. And that's just a hard reality that takes a while to kind of wrap your mind around. But yeah, this kind of habitat work, if it goes forward, will be very expensive. So building this facility is very expensive. It's compared to not doing it, it's less expensive.
Thank you, Mary Louise, for coming and giving helpful. Any questions?
Are the questions open to the public?
Up to the supervisors.
Yes.
appreciate, my degrees are in education. So I'm not really, I have some classes. One thing I can say is, going on 80 years of living along the Chehalis River. Great grandparents lived there. Grandparents, parents. I spent many a day on the Chehalis River. Land will never work for our river. One thing I'd like to ask first, how involved is the ecology in this? Through the years, I've tried to do a number of things along the Chehalis River, and they'll slap your hands and find cannot create a cold water spot in that river. Can't even fool around with log jams. We have plenty of them. Last winter was ended up 200 feet from the river. That river is wild when it floods. I've heard people talk about planting fir trees along the river. It's unbelievable. We have cottonwoods along the river. They're 4 or 5 feet in diameter. The river just takes them out. They might be there for 1 year, but once the river takes care of that root wad and removes all of that mud, the cottonwoods move. There are 2 of them right now. There are tons that are over in the neighbor's field. By the way, he's lost probably 20 acres of land. We've lost, I don't know, 15, 20 acres. That river, when it becomes like wild like that, you can't do anything. And it goes where it wants to go. I've got quite a few more questions, but it would take up too much time, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
That's something you can write out your questions and give them that to address those.
Pardon me?
If you would write down your questions that you have, we'll give them some back, and then he can contact you and get back to you on that.
Any comments again?
Absolutely. Can you use the mic though?
We live on Highway 6 by Twin Oaks, where they had just put in a culvert, millions of dollars spent, putting in a culvert, cutting down trees, and then replanting. It's already had to replant it, because it washed out. That's not the river. So when I look at that, I think of the millions of dollars that are being spent there with no fish. Bob says there hasn't been fish there for, I don't know, 60, 70 years.
It's called No Name Creek. And it floods Twin Oaks and Highway 6. I wish I would have kept count of how many times it's flooded.
I can see how many fish come through that culvert, that is, you could drive a truck through. You know, as an educator, I'd rather see that money go to kids or homeless, and I know that's not the issue here. But it does, you know, rips our hearts out to see that planted, and then we see the little guys coming to replant more bushes, and how much of those bushes that are gonna get washed out again? I'm tired of my money being wasted. Bob's been down to the house of the Chehalis to see the salmon ripped apart by the sea lions that are protected. They don't get up to us, they get ripped up. Nothing's done about that.
a difference in spending our money and taking people's land and for what? You know, it all looks pretty on paper, but that land belongs to people, and the best stewards of the land are the people that own that land.
I definitely agree with you on that, on state mandate for these fish culverts and the overblown projects that are with it. Our public works director would agree with you to a large degree with the amount that we have to do and the time that we have to do and the millions of dollars that it is costing. And because they put such a short turnaround on it, that you have supply chain demand that inflates the cost. So I'm with you. I think the majority of us are with you on wasting money. Tired of wasting money. We don't want to waste money. Money, it's far hard-earned money being on the river every time we regulation. I mean, we're about to be forced to spend $10 million to make a green, efficient building between 3 campuses, and we found out that annually we'll save $72,000 for a $10 million project to get this to make the state happy. So it's crazy.
Let it be happy.
I can understand your point to a certain extent, sir, but I've been in business for 48 years. Started at a pretty early age, and you can't say no. It's got to be dug in financially, and you got to have some wherewithal to say no. But on the other hand, the river, the bridge that he's talking about, built on Highway 6, that's a prime example, and I've expressed to you, the young lady, about your stream passages. Go around this 2 bridges they put in, go about 200 feet upstream, and you're in the 6 and 8 foot canary grass. Not real conducive to fish habitat. So I'm looking at this bridge, and I'm looking at this cement channel, and I'm looking at the angle that you're trying to portray, and there's no disrespect intended. But fish habitat isn't just that 600 foot of construction project. Fish habitat goes down the whole damn stream. I grew up on a creek down in Pacific County, and part of that project you got there it goes into Pacific County. But fish habitat is the whole stream, not just these cement little bridges you showed that with the gauge on it. That's just one little short portion. And you think you're going to appease somebody, or somebody's getting appeased by spending? I'm looking at the 6-digit figures. Okay, I know how hard it is to make money. The neat thing about government, you don't have to pay tax. So you're offering 30% less than what I am. But on the other hand, getting back to this stream issue, you talk about, the kid over here talking about the cost of doing or not doing. We're not getting the job done. And let me tell you, there was more fish coming up the Chehalis River when they were running flat bottom boats all the way to Coquito. I don't think they were leaving the trees in the river. I think they were cutting them out. But in the 40s and the 30s, flatboat boats came all the way to Coquito, actually up to Littell. There's a 6-inch crushed gravel there still in the middle of the river where they tied up. But what point I'm getting at, we weren't doing anything for fish habitat, and they were all over the place. So, I mean, it's just not the streams and these little bridges. You've got offshore canneries going today, and unfortunately, we've got some people down there in Cosmopolis and so forth that's got nets in the river. And like this Mrs. Pay was saying, they're not even getting to us. They're not even getting to them. I know little boys that are dead and gone now up at that, and they're talking about dynamite in the river up at PL and selling the fish on the black market during the war. They were filthy. They were all over the place. I don't see how we can take and try to achieve a fish habitat or an environment for fish in that volume, doing these little one-spec jobs wherever it runs underneath the road. That's not going to cut the mustard. I mean, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a wildlife guy or whatever. I'm just a true-blooded American that looks at results. They either work or they don't. And I'm not being pessimistic at all, but I'm not seeing a lot of forward results here and I've been involved with building some of these bridges. I just got done driving some piles on one over in Cosmopolis. There wasn't enough water in that stream to send a frog up it. But let me tell you, they spent $2 or $3 million, and of course I got a piece of it driving pilot, but I like to see projects that develop things. I love commerce, and it's getting just absolutely painful. We're trying to create a flood retention project and almost turn it into a damn habitat project. And when you see these numbers going out, I'm looking there now, I want to see results. That's what I want to see. I mean, I've had employees say, I'm trying. I'm looking at this project. I'm trying. You know what? We've tried long enough. We're trying to see some frickin' results here. Not just blueprints. I want to see some digging going on. It's so much of a Norwich site.
I need to agree with him totally. From when I was little in the 40s, 30s and 40s, the river was full of salmon. And I mean full. And I've watched through the years, there's been fewer and fewer. Now the salmon that come up that I see are very, very few. So the projects that we have are great. Everyone likes good habitat. That's not the answer. The answer is, where are the fish? I'll tell you one area nobody likes to talk about, but I've seen them in the Cowlitz. Anyone who digs clams know what a spit looks like out in the mouth of the Chehalis River. I got a chance to go out there on a field trip. This was a warehouser field trip, but the helicopter was chartered. The pilot, I don't know who he was, went through the entire warehouser operation from Dobie Dryad to Cosmopolis. Said, I want to take you to one more spot before we go back. Went out to the mouth of Chehalis. None of us knew what was going to happen until he dropped that helicopter over the first spit. And you should have seen the water boil. He went to 3, and the water boiled. Those are harbor seals. What do you suppose they're doing out there? I know exactly what they're doing. Is anything being done about that? No, because I think in 1972, were protected. Nobody likes to talk about that. And I take a magazine, I can say that the Northwest Indians have done a lot, tremendous lot. And they've mentioned that a few times, but you don't hear anyone mentioning that. I like to go down the coast, Washington, Oregon, go down to Astoria, Depot Bay, or even go up to Everett. I used to fish a lot out. Some of those docks you can't even get on. Take binoculars when I go off the highway. Within just a few minutes, I can spot a sea lion. How many of them are there out there? I know. Base of Bonneville, I think they can take up to 400 now, or more. A few of the other dams, they can take a few. That's not going to solve it. Nobody wants to say anything about that. I don't know, maybe instead of a salmon steak, everyone's going to be eating sea lion steak. I don't know. Something has to change. And I know there are other problems. You know, the ocean, yeah. Those factory ships out there, yeah.
There are birds down on the mouth of the Columbia that I've seen that have taken fingerlings that are going back out. I don't know, we have a real problem. Habitat, like I said, is great, but it doesn't bring back the fish. Now, we're for the dam. The dam is going to be way too small. I've seen a lot of floods. Could have twice the amount of water, maybe 3 or 4 times, who knows? This will help. We're not against the dam. And I know, my wife, we know why this is taking place. And as I mentioned, our good friends, the Native Americans, have done a lot. But that's where I'll end that part.
Definitely appreciate everyone's comments and questions. And please feel free to write down any other questions that you have, submit them to Matt, and I know that he will get back to you in an expeditious fashion.
I'd just like to make a few comments. And you have been indicating the frustration you feel. I felt them too. It's been a very frustrating time. We all remember that the floods in 2007, a long time ago. And what are some of the things we've done? We've done a lot of things, but there's a lot to do yet. And knowing who has the cards to play to get things done. The legislature said, off of Chehalis Basin, you will aggressively pursue working with fish and so got places to go. And I think Eric mentioned that earlier, and then there's this middle one that does a bit of both. So any money we spend on one side has to be equal on the other. When we're looking at projects and trying to say what's going to work here, and folks have talked about the culvert. Culverts have been an issue for a long time. What they for, Eric? 250,000 before, and now it's like 750,000. It costs to build those culverts. There was a special lock-in, and that's not any of us in this room, but that's what's written law. I share your frustration. I'm glad you're here today. I look forward to getting a copy of your letter and then the response back. So, I would encourage you to come again.
That's it for project update. Any announcements? Appreciate the presentation.